Earlier in May, we finally discovered the location of the 2027 World Cup, Brazil. Beating a rival bid from Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands, Brazil will become the very first South American country to host a Women's World Cup. Today, Brazilian football journalist Júlia Belas Trindade joins us to explain more about the background for this bid, what we can expect from a World Cup in Brazil, and if it can have a lasting impact in a country with, like England, its own troubled history with women's football. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you giving up your time. I can imagine you're in high demand at the moment. What with Brazil being announced as hosts of the 2027 Women's World Cup, what's the response been like in Brazil?
It's been crazy because the women's football community has fought so long for recognition, for support from the government, from the federation, and now suddenly, not suddenly, but after really long fights, they've actually been behind this project. So it's been quite interesting to see, and the players were really happy. They all spoke about how important that will be to inspire young girls to to become footballers, or to just try to watch football and play football and enjoy football, which is kind of the goal. And this project, this bid was released, was announced by the new government in Brazil that took over in 2023. So the first sports minister that we had was a former volleyball player called Ana Moza, and she was one of the biggest players, volleyball players in Brazilian history, and she works a lot with inspiring young girls to practice sports, any kind of sports. So it was really interesting to have her on board as well. And of course, we have the best player in history, so it's only natural, as they say.
Speaking of some of the incredible players that you have, I can't help but think back to the World Cup in 2019 when Marta made that impassioned speech on the side of the pitch. I think they just lost, and that was at the forefront of her mind, was calling out, people to fight and to push and to improve. And I think back to that speech she made again in Australia when she spoke about having role models and how growing up she didn't have role models, and now she has people stopping her in the street and wanting to be Marta. It was a really, really emotional, that's always been at the forefront of her mind. So I can only imagine what it's felt like for people who've been involved in the game for so long to have this announced.
Yeah, Marta is a crybaby, so she always cries, and she probably cried a lot watching the announcement. But yeah, for the players, it's we've hosted huge events before. We've hosted the Men's World Cup, the Olympics, the Pan American Games, and women's football has been huge in those events, and not in the Men's World Cup, of course, but all of the other ones. And it's quite interesting to see the players getting really involved and really passionate about having the World Cup, even though a lot of them don't play in Brazil anymore. A lot of them, Marta hasn't played in Brazil for decades now, and she's still like really connected to her homeland and to the fans in Brazil, and just trying to make women's football better in the country. And I feel like this is a huge step to achieve that.
And could you tell us a little bit more about the sort of background to the bid? Has this been a long time coming for the country?
Not necessarily. I feel like Brazil, a little bit of Brazilian politics. We had the Workers' Party in governing Brazil in the early 2000s until like the 2010s. So that's when we had the Pan American Games, the Olympics, and the Men's World Cup. So it is something that they've done before. It is kind of a platform for their government. And with the growth of women's football, I believe that was the next step they thought about. And back in 2007, when Brazil hosted the Pan American Games, we had one of the largest women's football crowds ever in the Maracanã. It was over 67,000 people watching the final against the United States. We beat the United States 5-0. It was amazing. And then years later, almost 10 years later, in the Olympics, we have 70,000 people watching Brazil lose to Sweden, which was really sad. But it's something that if you give people the opportunity to watch football in Brazil, they will watch football in Brazil. If you announce it properly, if you market it properly, if you put the affordable prices for tickets, which is not different than we see here in the UK or we saw it in Australia. People will be happy to watch a football game, and if it's a good football game, the better. But there's not women's football has been you know has suffered such prejudice in Brazil for so many years that to have the platform of a World Cup happening in our country will be amazing to try to change that.
The title of the bid is As Natural as Football, and that's kind of both making it natural, normalizing women's football, right, in the country, but also it's about conservation and sustainability, right? Like it's kind of a two-pronged approach. Why do you think that's so important to Brazil to have both of those?
It's quite interesting. I'm also a researcher. I research women's football. I'm doing a PhD. And one of the things that we talk a lot about football, men's football in Brazil, is the fact that we created this idea that Brazilians are naturally good at football. I'm not. And I'm the first example that it's not everyone. But there's this idea that if you're Brazilian, you have the flair, you have the jogo bonito, you know at least how to dribble someone and not embarrass yourself. And for football, when we talked about Brazilian football and about all the beautiful things that Brazilians do with football, it was always connected to the men's game. And now they are bringing this into the women's game as well. And we have brilliant players. We've always had brilliant players in the women's game. But a lot of people didn't have the opportunity to watch them play. So Brazil, in a couple of days, Brazil are going to play 2 friendlies in at home in Brazil, and in 2 cities that don't get a lot of either men's or women's football games, national team football games. And in Recife, we've had, I think, 20,000 tickets sold. Brazilians leave things to the last minute as well, so maybe in a few days we'll have more tickets sold. But it's always like people get involved in it, and we love hosting events, huge events. We love having street parties. So it all connects to the World Cup. And I remember in the 2014 World Cup, the men's World Cup, I remember stories about, foreign people just drinking in the streets for days and enjoying like Brazilian nature and Brazilian culture. And Brazilians don't speak a lot of other languages, but at the same time, they would be trying to connect with these people no matter what. So, it's quite interesting to see that, this bringing women's football into this space of if it should have always been here.
And you sort of touched a little bit about the sort of, the excitement around it, how Brazil is sort of synonymous with, football skills and dribbling. But can you give us a bit of context to sort of like where women's football, I suppose, is in Brazil right now in terms of sort of the grassroots, the infrastructure, pathways, accessibility? Because it's not something I suppose a lot of our listeners might not know about.
Yeah, quick history about women's football in Brazil. Women's football, we have records of women playing football in Brazil as early as 1915. But then, and it was always seen as exotic, as fun, that women in skirts playing football. And in the 1940s, in the early 1940s, in 1941, the president at the time, the dictator at the time, banned women from playing football. It wasn't just the federation like it was in the UK. It was actual, a ban.
Law.
If you were caught playing football in the street, you could have been arrested, and women never stopped playing. It was something that had a lot of prejudice. People would say it wasn't suitable for females or anything like that, but still women played. And for women's football to recover from that, it takes a long time, and it's taking a long time because I don't think we have recovered from that quite yet. Looking at the state of women's football now, we have bigger crowds. We have one of the biggest clubs in Brazil, Corinthians. They are at the forefront of women's football in the country. Arthur Elias, the current head coach of the women's national team, was the head coach that led Corinthians to a lot of success, like not only in the country but also in the continent. They draw huge crowds. They have a lot of acceptance from the supporters, but at the same time, you don't have a lot of examples. You have maybe a handful. They are concentrated in the south or the southeast. So this World Cup having host cities all over the country will be quite interesting to see how the rest of the country also embraces the women's game.
Going back to the bid, the description for the branding is unusual. Maybe it's lost in translation, but it's meant to symbolize water, because water symbolizes the essence of women. And it's both women and water have fluidity, yet they possess unstoppable power and the ability to generate life. Talk to us about that. Are we missing something in that description?
I don't think you are. And yeah, it's quite weird looking at when we talk about women's football and trying to be as inclusive as possible, and especially as inclusive to every woman as possible. It's quite odd that we will talk about women and giving life and everything, but at the same time I feel, and I haven't spoken to anyone that worked on the bid about it, but I feel like it's connected to some deities in a lot of Brazilian religions and cultures. So for example, in Brazilian folklore, we have Iara, who is the queen of the waters. She's like a mermaid in Brazilian rivers. The whole thing, draws men and drowns them and eats them. But it's one part of Brazilian folklore. We also have, like, in the Candomblé religion, which is a Afro-Brazilian religion. We have Oxum, who is the queen of and the goddess of sweet waters like rivers and lakes and stuff, and we have Iemanjá, who is connected to the seas. So it's quite odd to listen to it, but at the same time I kind of get where that comes from. But yeah, it's looking at Brazil, and if you look at the Brazilian map, of course, most of the cities and the heavily populated cities are close to the sea. Brazilian culture is really connected to water, and I see where that comes from, but yeah, it's a bit odd.
It makes way more sense now that you've explained.
It actually does.
Yeah, totally on board with it now.
I feel like it's going to be quite a sort of spiritual tournament in a way. I mean, it's a country that I 100% wanted to get the bid, so I was so absolutely excited beyond belief that you guys got it, because it kind of felt like a country I've never been to, a culture I've never experienced. But how do you think this World Cup will look in Brazil in terms of the atmosphere and like this kind of environment and sustainability side of things, but also like the spirituality, the food, the music, like how it feels to me like it's going to be I don't know, like a celebration in a way. Like, how do you see it looking?
I just got goosebumps because that's exactly what I think. I had to control myself. I have to control myself over the next 3 years because I keep inviting people over. I live in the UK, so I keep inviting people over to Brazil. No, stay at mine. I can find places for you to stay in other cities. So now I've actually done that quite a few times, which my mom won't be happy about. But it's so cool to see that the players. I was talking to some some European players at an event in Bilbao, and they were all super excited to go to Brazil. Some who have been in the Olympics were like, I really want to go back. I really want to see different cities. Others who haven't been in Brazil before were like, I'm going to text all of my Brazilian former teammates or current teammates to see what should I do. Brazil is such a huge country. It's so diverse, and in the same tournament, if you have the money to travel around, because it's huge, it's flying all over. But if you have money to travel around, you can find it, and it's going to be in the middle of winter, so you can go to the south and get like really, really cold temperatures. You can go to the northeast, where I come from, where it's like 25 degrees, and you can go to the beach in the middle of winter, or you can go to the Amazon, or you can just enjoy every kind of scenery that you can. I highly recommend, like, start saving up now, because after the tournament, take a holiday and just travel around a little bit. But I feel like every single journalist from other countries that I spoke to in the past few days was like, I was really rooting for Brazil. I really wanted an excuse to go to Brazil and just travel around a little bit. I feel like it's going to be amazing for people who have not had the opportunity to go to Brazil. And if they do it right, advertising it properly, supporting the tournament properly, it's going to be really, really crowded, really, really amazing to see.
And with it being the first South American country to host the Women's World Cup, it's something I remember from the 2019 World Cup in France, is that they didn't really feel like the country embraced the tournament. Like, you could go through cities and some people they wouldn't even know that they were hosting a World Cup. I think Australia did a really good job of embracing their Indigenous communities, and kind of, felt like I learned quite a lot during that tournament, and it was something they were keen to share. Do you feel like Brazil is, given its, the home of football, if you like, England will kill me for saying that, but that flair, that like, do you feel they're going to embrace the tournament like that and really feel that pride in sharing your culture and saying, we're the first South American country to do this Women's World Cup, we are going to absolutely put it on the map?
Yes, and it's a bit sad because Brazilians, we love to win in football. So if we don't win, it's a failure. And I really hope that doesn't get in the way, because we had a really bad result in Australia. So I'm trying to get ahead of myself and try not to raise too many expectations. But looking at the Brazilian people, we love showing Brazil around. I'm from Salvador. It's a really a really touristy city, and it's the best place in the world. And looking at the way that foreign people, when they arrive, tourists, they are welcome everywhere. If you are lost, people will get out of the way to help you. People will try to show you around, recommend the best places, ask you to just come over and eat something at their place. It's that kind of place. And I feel like you'll see that a lot around Brazil. We are really welcoming people. And even if, people are not necessarily going to the stadiums, or if they don't have time to watch all the games, they will still be happy to have people over and just enjoy. And I mean, Brazilians love to party. Like, if you come with a partying vibe and just going out, going to the sambas, going to the music and enjoying yourself, we'll join you. Absolutely.
So we'll definitely be taking you up on the offer of accommodation.
Yes.
Upfront at Julia's house is on the schedule for 2027. Or Upfront at the carnival. I just feel like that would be such a vibe. Yeah,
Yes.
We've not done a couple of at the matches at the stadiums and things, but never at the carnival. So pending. I just want to touch a little bit on the presentation. There was a really beautiful line that sort of said, we're going to stage the games in all of our best stadiums because that's what the players deserve. That must be absolutely massive to hear. I know the players will obviously be, welcoming that sentiment. All of the largest grounds which were used in the 2014 Men's World Cup finals are going to be used again. And you kind of look at some of the bid books, that America and, especially the Belgium, Netherlands, Germany bid book. And they were saying that he proposed the German stadiums close to the Belgium and Dutch border. But for Brazil, we were like, yeah, we're going to go large. We're going to go with the best. How does that sound?
It's amazing, and we've been fighting a long time for the players to have access to the largest stadiums, to the biggest stages in football in Brazil. And we get that when there's like the Olympics or the Pan American Games, but not every club, not even close to every club, gives the female players access to the big stadiums. It's something that we don't see a lot in Brazil. Corinthians do that. They host some games in their main stadium, and every single time it's like records and record breaking audience and really good atmosphere. But for example, in Flamengo have signed Cristiane in this year, and they haven't played in the Maracanã yet. And if you have Cristiane in your team, like, you should play everywhere. You should play her in every city just because she's amazing. And it's quite positive to see that even though the clubs may not be doing the work of putting the women in the stadiums, the the organization will be saying no, that's where they're going to play. And with the bids, it was, they some of the stadiums, they announced that they are going to only open the lower section and then open the next sections, which, it's still a bit not putting a lot of faith in women's football. But if you give affordable tickets, I'm sure that people will show up.
Also, better to have the option to scale up than putting it
Yes.
at like a 10,000 seater stadium and that's it. Like, what's cool is women's football tends to always over deliver when it comes to crowds, and I think they'll probably be hopefully pleasantly surprised and have to open it further and further, which is great. At least we know they have the option to get it up to 40, 50,000, even if it starts at 20. So that's quite forward thinking. I like that. Rather than limiting themselves and saying we're only going to put them in smaller stadiums, they've gone for the big ones, and at least the option is there to extend if they're able to, which would be great, because there's been talk about, affordable tickets, about free transport to stadiums, which is huge as well, and particularly in women's football when you're not always making a big profit out of tournaments like this. So that's, quite ambitious. But I do want to know, because it did feel like we were waiting ages to find out who was going to get this bid. It's only 3 years away. I guess having all of those stadiums available was really useful, so there's none of this building stuff. But was it a little bit of a concern that we still didn't know until only last week?
Yes, and I honestly feel they should have tried to announce. It wasn't a bad bid at all, like the European bid. They could have announced no, 2031, and then give other bidders a little bit more a head start to try to prepare better to host the World Cup. But still, baby steps. Every 4 years we get a little bit more. But yeah, it's 3 years. It's a really short time. And looking at Brazil, the way that things were built for the Men's World Cup, some stuff was only finished. Infrastructural stuff was only finished in 2016, 2017. So, we have everything ready now, which is good. That won't get in the way. And then it's more about organization. In Brazil it's a complex country, so it's a bit of a mess sometimes. You'll see a lot of difference between the cities and the way they are structured, because it's a huge country, continental country. So everywhere you have these kinds of different structure, different access to public transport. It's different. And but the good thing about it is that you can always find a way to do things, and you can always try to go around it a little bit. And free transport is always something that it's really helpful for people, because Brazil is a huge country and the cities are huge, so people use cars all the time. Having free public transport will support them in that sense. Having people over as well who don't want to rent a car, don't want to be able to don't want to be stuck in traffic for hours, it's going to be better. And now we have better structure than 2014 for sure, so it's going to be awesome. I'm so happy about it.
And I absolutely don't mean to put a dampener on absolutely anything, but just sort of to give a more well-rounded sort of view on the delivery of the tournament. Like Rach said, there's only sort of 3 years between now until we actually, get stuck in and it all kicks off. And you mentioned there sort of free public transport. Obviously, in the bid book, there was, a lot of promises about sustainability and the environmental impact of the tournament. Are there any concerns that you have, or are there any kind of concerns in the sense of over-delivering on some of the promises that are made about the bid and how the tournament will be delivered?
Yeah, it's these concerns are more in the sense of how are they going to negotiate all these amazing things that they are promising, because the bid is from the national government, and then you have the state government, and then you have the mayor's offices in the cities. So when you get to that point, it's all about politics and negotiation. And Brazil is not really the most stable country politically, so um, we have it's complex to imagine that, for example, we have an election in 2026 and then we'll have the event in 2027, but which is going to be a really tight election, and then hopefully for the best, and hopefully for a government that really supports the World Cup as well. So it's always difficult to organize something in Brazil because of all these levels and structures in structure of power. But at the same time, it's something that at least for the next 2 years, people will be making sure that it's done the best way possible. And of course, I feel like one of the best things about hosting a World Cup is the fact that foreign media, foreign organizations, global organizations will be looking quite closely at Brazil and quite closely at how they are organizing it, because I feel that sometimes they treat women's football as an easy way to get good, to get good promotion, to say, oh, we are good, we are nice, we support women's football, without actually delivering it. So I feel like, especially after Australia, which was a huge, so cool tournament, there will be a lot of scrutiny over how Brazil are dealing with it, and the fact that they have the structure ready, they just need to actually organize it. It's even more because they have to be really, really good about it. Otherwise, there's no excuse.
They've also spoken about, the goal being a transformation not only for country but for the continent. How do you see this tournament being transformational for a CONMEBOL, like women's foot, like more broadly across the tournament? Because some of the fans I think about in Australia, the Colombian fans, incredible. Can we expect like a big influx of other teams fans should they qualify, but also more broadly outwardly after the tournament, do we see it having an impact on the wider continent?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Colombia are going to host the Under 20 Women's World Cup. They have been, at the same time, they have been really successful with the women's national team, and they have been fighting inside the country for better conditions and for, a professional league. And it's not that long ago that, Colombian players were not being paid or were not being supported by the league or the club. So, for example, Colombia is a great success history that we have in South America. And we've had Argentina qualifying for the World Cup. We've had Chile, we have Chile with Tiani Endler, who probably be fighting hard to try to qualify Chile for the World Cup. So it's going to be an extra incentive for other countries in South America to be better into support women's football. This has been happening over the last 5 years. Ever since the France World Cup, people have been more and more aware that women's football is going to grow and is growing in South America as well. So the players have been fighting a lot for better conditions and showing to other countries in South America that Brazil are going to host it and that Brazil are going to be great at hosting it, hopefully. For them, it's an extra incentive to say, look, we can do this too. And Brazil are usually at the forefront of football in the continent. And of course, we have a lot of success in in the Libertadores, for example. We have Corinthians, who have been, people are claiming for Corinthians to play the World Club Championships because they want Corinthians to play Lyon or Barcelona to see who's better and just settle the debate. So, Brazilians are quite, confident in the sense that, we can do a great tournament. And also, South Americans are quite confident that they can throw a huge party. So,
well, finally, Julia, we're going to put you on your swords. Do you think Brazil could lift the Women's World Cup trophy on home soil? Or do we think it's a distant possibility?
In Brazil, we say that football is a little box of surprises. So things can always happen in football. And the fun part of football, if you're not supporting any of the teams playing, is the imprevisibility, is like the fact that anything can happen, and that, you can go to penalties and just, not know who is going to win. So the possibility is there, and the beautiful thing about it is that people will be rooting for Brazil all the way through. And if Brazil loses, then we'll embrace Colombia, or we'll embrace another South American team, then the African teams, then we have a whole hierarchy.
So you can never lose.
So you always win.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, that's the thing for us. And but yeah, I think it's a difficult possibility because, of course, Brazil are still years behind on women's game development. We've had, I say that we've had a full generation that wasn't brought to fruition because we've had such a huge success with, Marta, Cristiane, and Formiga, that they stayed for quite a long time. Marta and Cristiane are still in the national team, are probably going to the Olympics. So, after they reach the 30, 35 years old, we are now getting to a younger generation. And I honestly don't know if they will be ready to take over, to take on the mantle of carrying women's football in Brazil. But at the same time, it is a really good generation. We have really good players. We have a really good generation that's coming from the under 20s, from the under 17s. So we've built a nice foundation to it. It should be better, but we've been building a nice foundation to it. Hopefully, they will be inspired by the crowd. Hopefully, they will be inspired by what the former players did before them. In 2008, Brazil were silver in the Olympics, and they went to the podium with a sign that says, with a banner that says, "Brazilians, we need support." And I feel like we've been calling for support for the past, in 27, it will be almost 20 years. But at the same time, when it comes and when they have time and space to develop the women's game in Brazil, it's going to be amazing. Like, you should really worry about playing Brazil in a few years.
I feel a little bit nervous after that, actually. Well, Júlia, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you giving up your time. But we'll have to get you back on when we're sort of reaching the business end of getting into the Women's World Cup in 2027.